Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, talking up the game we love with the best discussion, debate, and analysis in the game. We got Steve Dace on the line from Michigan Podcast. Also join him on his new venture, the Bigger 10. So, Steve, before we dive into your team talent ratings, would love to know more about the Bigger 10. We have mentioned it here from time to time, but an explanation of your new venture.
We just thought it'd be fun to take what we do for Michigan Podcast, Mark, and apply it to the Big Ten as a whole. And so it comes from a pro Big Ten perspective. I guess maybe we kind of treat the Big Ten the way Paul Feinbaum does the SEC. All right. So we are from a pro Big Ten perspective. But if someone in the Big Ten is not doing what they need to do to benefit the Big Ten, we call them out. Kind of like what Feinbaum will do with an SEC team he thinks is kind of dragging the rest of the league down. That's kind of how we operate with Bigger 10. And with everything canceled right now, we're working our way through a series where we're answering kind of meta questions about Big Ten athletics and college athletics. And this week's question happens to be from one of our listeners who asked, is there any Big Ten program poised to conquer or replace Ohio State at the top of the college football heap in the league? So if you want to get our answer to that, it's on the very same channel there on YouTube. For Michigan Podcast, and we put that out on Wednesdays, the day after we put out Michigan Podcast. So thanks for letting me mention it. I appreciate it.
Folks who watch me on a regular basis know that the ones who ask me, what do you watch? What do you listen to? 9 out of 10 times when they mention someone, I don't even know who they're talking about. 98% of the time, I don't have the time or have not put the value in the product out there to consume that. But the conversation that you're just describing right there, who could possibly take over as the top dog with Ohio State or supplant them, I took on that conversation start to finish, as well as your conversation that was fascinating involving the Michigan-Ohio State dynamic. You brought on Ari Wasserman from The Athletic and had quite the debate on the talent gap or perceived talent gap between Ohio State and Michigan and the results of the last 2 years in particular, and the last 15 years, as you pointed out repeatedly. Also, you're part of the argument.
Right. I don't want to put words in Ari's mouth. That everything's there. People can go watch it for themselves. I think you'll see that and I get too, given he's younger than me and he's covering this season by season, that he's particularly moved by how dominant Ohio State was the last 2 years when these were perceived to be Jim Harbaugh's two best teams with all of his recruits. I get that. And I don't even fault him for that. But I'm looking at it from the perspective of a Michigan fan where it's really just one collective 15-year curb stomp. And the reality is if Michigan only beat Ohio State when they had more talent, we'd have a lot fewer wins against Ohio State here the last 40 to 50 years because they almost never have more talent than Ohio State. And I mean, I went back and looked at the 70s, and I went and looked at NFL draft picks in the 70s when there were, 15, 12 rounds to the draft. I looked at the 80s. I looked at the 90s when Michigan dominated the rivalry, and it was a little closer in talent, but Ohio State still had quantifiably more talent from an NFL perspective than Michigan had. So I agree that Ohio State is the more talented team now, but when you're sending just as many players as they are to the combine, and I understand that Jeff Okudah and Chase Young are going to be higher drafted than any Michigan prospects. I understand that. But when collectively this isn't basketball where one or two guys just dominate and win a championship for you. This is 22 guys. And when collectively you're sending as many guys to the NFL scouting combine as another team that just went into your stadium and beat you by 29 points, there's a lot more going on there, in my view, than just straight up recruiting rankings. So that was kind of the point that I was making. But I thought he raised some good points as well and had good data backing up his claim. So I'd urge people just go to the Michigan Podcast channel here on YouTube and watch that for themselves and make up their own minds.
And that's what makes it fun when you have two intelligent people that have formed, an opinion based on logic and a database, get together and duke it out. So that's what made it fun. Let me bring up this one aspect of the rivalry that I don't know that was addressed that just came to mind. Ohio State's obsessed with Michigan, and the Ohio State fan base is obsessed with Michigan, even winning 14 of 15 years, still obsessed with winning that game. On the Michigan side, I don't think there's any question that if you asked any reasonable Michigan fan who's your number one rival, they would say Ohio State, even when Michigan State jumped up and Notre Dame was a part of the schedule each and every year. But the obsession doesn't seem to be at fever pitch for Michigan. I recollect a tweet that I saw about 2 months ago where a Michigan fan said, was basically in a condescending way saying, Ohio State's obsessed with us. It's ridiculous. And then I saw some replies to basically say, and you see the results of that. So once you get obsessed with Ohio State and once you get obsessed about being elite, maybe you will be again. Do you think that factors into it?
I think that's part of it. I mean, you're an Ohio State guy. I'm a Michigan guy. All right. So we know our fan bases pretty well. Okay. So, I mean, as being around Bucknuts, you know what mania is, right? You get it. Okay. Being around Wolverines, I know what condescending is. All right. So, Michigan fans being condescending, that's the Department of Redundancy department. And Ohio State fans being maniacal is itself a double redundancy. But that goes to the culture of the two universities that I think, again, predate these 15 years. You know, I grew up in the 80s. And Michigan Ohio State was a big deal then, but I became a fan post Woody Bowe, and Earl Bruce and Bo Schembechler just wasn't, you know, amongst me and my friends growing up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. You know, we hated Iowa and Hayden Fry more. I mean, they were usually the higher ranked team. We played them one year when I was in school, and it was 1 versus 2, right? And you know, and years later in my career, when I got a chance to get to know Earl Bruce very well and cover him as our arena football coach here in Iowa. And I used to sit over at, you know, a fancy Italian restaurant here in town and listen to him spin great stories about Woody and stuff. I just didn't grow up in that era and have that ingrained hatred. You know, I respected the hell out of the rivalry and the tradition of it, but I didn't have like a maniacal hatred for Ohio State. That actually has just developed probably in the last few years, and it's more probably because of the frustration I feel with my own team's inability to hold up its end of the bargain, more so than Ohio State. And I think that Michigan fans, because there is a little condescension there that's ingrained in our psyche, they're never going to match the mania of Ohio State fans, and probably never have. I mean, Michigan fans, rightly or wrongly, you know, take themselves collectively a lot of pride in themselves as being more cosmopolitan, more enlightened, having other interests, not thinking about this all the time. Okay. And then they'll tell you that, well, we've got, you know, we don't even play Minnesota right now. That's an older rivalry. We got to play Michigan State every year. We have Notre Dame, you know, as well. We just can't afford to put all of our eggs in one basket like Ohio State can and just obsess over them the way they obsess over us, which again is a little condescending, frankly. But there is some truth to that there's just more things going on in from a Michigan football perspective. And then I think you have to throw in the communities. You know, until Columbus got the NHL team, I believe it was the largest television market in the country that didn't have any pro sports teams, right? Well, yes. Ann Arbor is a derivative of Detroit, basically. And so, you know, Michigan boosters are also buying luxury boxes at Tiger Stadium, and then it was the Silverdome, and now Ford Field, and the Joe Louis Arena, and now the Palace. You know, Ohio State's business community, it was just all, they didn't have those other avenues. So it was just all Ohio State all of the time. So there's something in there culturally ingrained too, where a lot of the business donor fan community had other rooting interest within that community year round, other than just Michigan football, as big of a spectacle as it is. And until recently in that Columbus area, you know, Ohio, and even now in most of North America, the NHL is a niche sport. Okay. So I think there's a lot of different factors there. Now there's a growing chorus of Michigan fans that would appreciate taking some of that obsession on and ending this once and for all. I would be among them. But since I don't sense that is, I don't think that's just what Harbaugh is about. I don't really know why. It's odd to me. The guy who made his bones predicting a victory over Ohio State and living up to it. It's just odd to me. Like, he got rid of Brady Hoke's countdown clock and stuff like that. And I just think, you know, I think we, by and large, got a different Jim Harbaugh than the one that went to Stanford, Mark. I do. I think the one that went to Stanford was a college football coach and understood there's a gimmicky aspect to being a college football coach. I think the guy that we have is an NFL coach who just happens to love Michigan. And I just think we've got Kirk Ferentz with better talent. He just doesn't, the rah-rah stuff, the gimmicky stuff, that just, he tried that when he first got here and was actually very successful with it, with the sleepovers and the satellite camps. Mm-hmm. And he had to kind of build our brand. But now that you've seen all that stuff go away the last few years. And I really just think in the end, we have a guy that is an NFL coach who just happens to love Michigan and is probably just, from a persona standpoint, it's just not wired to do that level of obsession. Where Bo comes here and changes the offense to emulate Ohio State and the defense to emulate Ohio State. And the week of the 69 game, every scout team player wears 50 to be reminded of Woody Hayes putting 50 on, the Wolverines the year before. And I just don't think he's wired like that.
You're causing me to review my formative years, and I certainly wasn't the black sheep in my family, but I was kind of the oddball in that I didn't follow along with the likes and interests of the rest of my family. So my family is not a sports family. I just became a sports nut from I don't know where. I became obsessed with a lot of other things, a couple other things in life. No influence there. So at the age of 8, I taken my first Ohio State Michigan game on TV. Wolverines win at 22-0, and I can.
That's 1976.
1976. I vividly remember me standing and throwing my fist within inches of the television at Bo Schembechler being carried off the field. Just I was so upset, so mad. There was no influence in my family to act like that. There was no social media. I read every word in the sports page every day because that's how you consumed it at the time. There was no cable TV at the time. How was I getting this? How was this hatred being built up that early watching my first Ohio State Michigan game? And then it just catapulted from there.
There was an incident in last year's Ohio State Michigan game that I think is anecdotal evidence of what I'm saying. In that I just don't think that level of Schembechler-like obsession. I think that Jim Harbaugh could do stuff like that 10 years ago, but then he went to the NFL and has mellowed out basically. And then I think here's what it looks like when you then try to overcompensate and contrive that. Like it's not part of your DNA, but you're trying to compensate now for what you think is lacking. There was a moment in last year's game, which in the Woody Bo years, this stuff just never happened. I mean, in the Earl Bruce Bo years, this stuff didn't happen. In the 10-2-1 years, it didn't happen. And it was the moment when we tackled J.K. Dobbins. I think this was in the first or second quarter. And our team captain, Carlo Kemp, who's a great young man. I've heard him interviewed a million times. This guy is going to be governor of something someday, okay? Pulls a total Sparty move at the bottom of the pile and starts twisting Dobbins' ankle and takes his shoe off and unties it, or maybe he untied his shoe. No, he untied his shoe. That's what he did. He untied his shoe, okay? That is such a Bush League Sparty move. That's like beneath the dignity. Like, this is where the Michigan condescension comes in. Like, we like to believe we're superior to everyone else and don't have to do stuff like this, okay? We're the leaders and best after all. And so to see our team captain pull a shenanigan, a Conrad Dobler, B-movie slap shot, kind of, douche canoe play. Mark, I've seen every snap of football Michigan has played in every televised game going back to 1969, either live or I've gone back and watched them on YouTube since, before I was born. I've never seen a Michigan player do something like that. And certainly not in a game of this magnitude. You go back.
Honest buffoonery.
It is.
The only defense I will make for it is that in similar situations, we've seen teams get frustrated, players get frustrated, and take it out with physical shots that can harm someone.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that. It was just clownish buffoonery.
No, it was total Bush League play, right? Like, as we're men, we're not football players, but as dudes, I think you could too, totally understand. I'm so tired of getting my ass kicked by these guys 15 years in a row. I lose my cool and do something really dumb, right? That I think we could understand, okay? But this level, there's at least like some testosterone involved in that poor decision. This was just freaking clown show. And I remember rewinding my DVR, watching the game live. I'm like, I did not see that. Sure enough, I did. And that to me is the kind of stuff that happens now when you're just trying to come up with something. You're just trying stuff. And I think that I think that's a bad omen, because I think that's the kind of stuff you'd never see. Go watch the Michigan State game. They tried pulling a bunch of stuff like that on us, and we're blowing them out. We keep our cool and laugh at them on the field while their guys are getting ejected. That's typically how Michigan has played. And because that's kind of the point I was also trying to make to Ari Wasserman. There is a talent gap between these two teams. But if you're sending 11 players to the NFL Combine, it's not a 29-point talent gap. We're not. This isn't Ohio State versus Florida Atlantic, guys. Okay, we sent 11 guys to the NFL Combine. They come into our stadium and beat us by 29. I'm more concerned seeing our captain pull crap like that than I am some blown assignment that leads to J.K. Dobbins housing us, because that's a NFL first-round draft pick. That's the kind of that kind of run by J.K. Dobbins is not how a team as talented as Michigan loses by 29 points to Ohio State. Your team captain mentally reduced to some form of second grade ass clownery. That's how you lose to Ohio State by 29 points.
So here's my summary on your conversation with Ari Wasserman. And again, please jump on over there. We're going to have a good discussion here, Steve and I, when we get to these team talent rankings as well. So don't do it quite yet, but jump on over the conversation on Michigan Podcast. You can check that thing out every week regardless, but certainly the two conversations that Steve had, the one with Ari Wasserman concerning the Ohio State-Michigan talent gap, and then the conversation that they had answering a question about who could possibly supplant or join Ohio State atop the Big Ten. My summary of it involving Ohio State versus Michigan is that I think the talent gap is not significant, but I think it's decided. You couldn't argue that Michigan has more talent or as much talent even across the board than Ohio State, but it's decided. But to your point right there, and I make this one all the time, in general, of course, people can pick out specific games. Maryland took Ohio State to overtime 2 years ago. Generally, Ohio State is obviously beating the entire Big Ten. They're only losing one game, if that, a year in the Big Ten. That's going back to 2005. One game every year in the Big Ten. So they are housing everyone. But they are generally housing the Rutgers and the really bad teams by 5 and 6 touchdowns. They are not, aside from a really good Ohio State team last year, elite team that beat Indiana 51-10 last year, even the Indianas and the mid-tier teams in the Big Ten, Ohio State is not generally beating them as badly as they've beaten Michigan the last 2 years.
Let's go back to 2018 and look at you played against Minnesota at home, Nebraska at home.
Absolutely.
It was like a weekly scuffling, and then suddenly they're the 27 Yankees the Saturday they play us. All right.
Absolutely.
You lost this game up here. And at least of that magnitude, maybe if those two teams played, the 2018 teams played 10 times, maybe Ohio State would win 7 of them. But I don't know how many of them they would have won by 28 points like that. Okay. And I think that's just, it's the old Yogi Berra line. Half of this game is 90% mental.
Yeah. So again, if you take Ohio State's performances by and large against the mid-tier teams in the Big Ten, they're winning those games comfortably, but they're winning them in the fourth quarter. Like there are one-score games going into the fourth quarter, then they generally find some differential there. But they are taking on top 10 to 12 talented teams in the nation in Michigan and beating them the way they've beaten them the last 2 years. So there's something else there, because they're not beating Indiana, the Indiana tier of 7 and 5 team in the Big Ten routinely like they are beating Michigan.